"You're not supposed to be in here." His voice was low, but it carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised. Lena looked up from the floor where she sat, the baby curled against her chest beneath the faded lavender quilt. Her legs were numb from hours of sitting. Her back sore from the hardwood, but none of that mattered right now. "I didn't want to leave her alone," Lena said, her voice soft but steady. "She wouldn't settle in the crib." "That's not what I mean." Charles Whitmore stepped into the nursery. The hallway light framed him like a figure in a photograph, tall, composed. A navy suit hanging flawlessly on broad shoulders even at this hour. He moved with the calm precision of a man used to entering rooms that stopped for him. Lena's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure which part of his gaze unsettled her more, the fact that it lingered on her longer than necessary, or that it was utterly unreadable. "You were in my office earlier today." It was a statement, not a question. She blinked. "I was passing by, carrying coffee for the staff meeting. You looked at my desk." "I didn't." She stopped herself. She had glanced, yes, just for a heartbeat, at a picture frame lying face down. But she'd told herself it meant nothing. Charles's eyes didn't waver. "You noticed something?" Her stomach tightened. "I was just doing my job, sir." "That remains to be seen." The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a tiny whimper. Lena instinctively rocked her, the movement small but protective. Charles's gaze dropped to the quilt. "Why the floor?" "I can hear her breathing better from here." He studied her in silence. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall. The air felt heavier with every second. "I don't like people keeping secrets in my house," he said finally. Lena held his stare, even as the instinct to look away tugged at her. "Neither do I." Something flickered in his expression, not anger, but interest. And maybe, just maybe, the faintest crack in the armor he wore so well. The wind rattled the nursery window. Lena had no way of knowing this was the moment everything shifted, that the next words spoken in this quiet room would set a chain of events in motion none of them could stop. Before we dive into the story and see what happened, make sure to like the video and hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep creating more stories. Lena Parker was used to being invisible. That was part of the job. At 30, she'd worn enough uniforms to know how people looked past the person and straight at the role. Here, in the Whitmore estate, the gray maid's dress and white sneakers were her armor and her cage. She'd been hired 6 weeks ago, a recommendation from a neighbor who'd once worked in the kitchen here. "It's good money," the neighbor had said, "if you can handle the way they look at you." She thought she could. Charles Whitmore was not the kind of man you bumped into twice without remembering it. Billionaire real estate developer. Philanthropist when cameras were around. A father, though you wouldn't know it from the distance he kept from his own child. His power wasn't just in his bank account. It was in the way people rushed to fill silences for him, to offer explanations before he asked for them. Right now, he was filling the nursery with that same unspoken dominance. "You keep sleeping on the floor?" he asked, voice still measured. "I keep her safe," Lena replied. "You think she's unsafe here?" She hesitated. "I think babies don't know the difference between a mansion and a trailer. They just know when someone's close." Charles didn't respond, but something in his jaw shifted, a tightening, then a release. From the hallway came the faint shuffle of slippers. Mrs. Marjorie, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. She'd been in the Whitmore household for 20 years, her loyalty etched into the lines on her face. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked, eyes flicking quickly over Lena before landing back on Charles. He didn't take his eyes off Lena. "We're just having a conversation." Marjorie gave a polite smile, but Lena saw it, that silent message in the older woman's eyes. "Careful." Behind Marjorie, the night security guard lingered like a shadow. He didn't speak, just waited, as if ready to escort someone out if needed. It hit Lena then. She was outnumbered in this house in more ways than one. Not by people, but by power. Power that could decide whether she stayed employed. Power that could twist an innocent moment into something suspect. "Get some rest," Charles said finally, turning toward the door. But his voice had the weight of unfinished business. "We'll talk again in the morning." As the others drifted away, Lena looked down at the sleeping baby. The little girl's tiny hand clung to the quilt like it was the only solid thing in the world. Lena knew that feeling. And somewhere deep in her chest, a thought began to form, quiet, but steady. She might be invisible to them now, but she wouldn't stay that way forever. By morning, the house hummed with quiet order, the kind that came from money, routine, In an unspoken hierarchy, everyone seemed to understand except Lena. She carried a tray into the breakfast room, where the sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows onto a table long enough to seat 12. At one end sat Charles Whitmore, reading a folded newspaper with a steaming mug of coffee beside him. The seat across from him was empty. The baby was still upstairs with the nanny who worked days. "Set it there," he said without looking up. Lena placed the tray down, careful not to let the silverware clink. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said, eyes still on the paper. "Do you like the job?" "It's work," she replied cautiously. "And before this?" Lena hesitated. "Different jobs." He finally looked at her. "That's not much of an answer. Most of them didn't last long enough to get into the details," she said, her tone neutral. Something in the corner of his mouth twitched. Not amusement, exactly, but the faint recognition of someone unwilling to give more than they had to. From the doorway, Marjorie entered, holding a clipboard. "Sir, the contractors are waiting for you in the West Wing." He waved her off. "They can wait 5 minutes." His eyes returned to Lena. "You were in my office again this morning." Lena blinked. "No, sir. I walked by it to get to the kitchen." He leaned back in his chair. "Funny thing about walking by an open door, people forget that it works both ways. I see who passes." Her cheeks heated. "With respect, Mr. Whitmore, I'm not here to snoop. I'm here to work. And work means following boundaries," he said, the softness in his tone thinning. "You're in my home, around my child, and I don't know anything about you." Marjorie shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "She's been doing good work." "I'll decide that," Charles cut in, never taking his eyes off Lena. The air between them felt like a wire pulled too tight. Lena's instinct was to step back, to shrink, but she kept her shoulders squared. "I've got nothing to hide," she said, though her voice carried a tremor she hated. He set the paper down with deliberate precision. "Then you won't mind if we have a conversation about your future here." She understood the threat beneath the words. A conversation about her future in this house could mean a phone call by noon telling her she no longer had one. By the time she left the breakfast room, whispers followed her, the other staff glancing up from their duties with that mix of pity and self-preservation. In houses like this, no one wanted to be caught siding with the wrong person. Later that afternoon, Lena was in the laundry room when she overheard 2 voices in the hall. "Don't know why he keeps her," one of the maids whispered. "You can tell she's not like us. Marjorie says she's good with the baby," another replied. "Maybe that's all that matters. Until it isn't," the first one said, her tone sharp. Lena stayed still, folding a towel with mechanical precision, the words pressing against her like a cold hand at the back of her neck. That evening, Charles's tone grew even more clipped. He called her into his study, the one she'd been accused of passing by too often. The fire was lit, throwing shadows on the shelves lined with leather-bound books and framed awards. "I run my life and my business the same way," he said without preamble. "Order, discipline, trust." Lena stood by the doorway, hands clasped in front of her. "I understand." "I'm not sure you do," he said. "If I can't be certain about the people in my home, they don't stay in my home. That's the rule." She didn't answer right away. She was thinking not about him, but about the sleeping baby upstairs, the one who reached for her quilt every night. "I'm here for her," Lena said finally. His brow lifted. "For my daughter?" "For the child," she corrected, her tone soft but firm. The distinction hung in the air. He didn't like it. "Be careful, Miss Parker," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Loyalty is admirable, but misplaced loyalty? That's dangerous." When she left the study, the door shut behind her with a sound that felt like the closing of something more than just wood and hinges. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay on the nursery floor as usual, the baby's breath slow and even beside her. The glow from the monitor lit the edge of her quilt, the same one she'd kept since she was 16. Her eyes traced the patterns in the fabric, and a memory rose up uninvited. A different room, a different time. A worn couch in a small public library. The smell of old paper. Her own hands, ink-stained, moving quickly across a notebook as she copied down lines from a book she couldn't afford to check out. The book had been about law, the kind of dense, heavy text most people avoided. But Lena had devoured it. She remembered the librarian's voice. "You've got a sharp mind, Lena. Don't waste it." Back then, she'd believed she could use it, that she might even work in an office. Someday, maybe for a law firm. But life had a way of turning big dreams into small, immediate needs. Rent, groceries, the phone bill. The first job had been waitressing. The second, cleaning offices at night. Somewhere, between the third and the sixth, she stopped telling people she'd once wanted more. Now, in the Whitmore nursery, she closed her eyes against the sting in her chest. Down the hall, a muffled voice reached her, Charles on the phone. His tone was brisk, impatient. She caught phrases here and there. Contract terms, legal exposure, not acceptable. Without meaning to, her mind followed the trail of his words, piecing them together. She'd learned, over the years, to hear between the lines, to spot the place where someone's argument bent under its own weight. And here, in the half-dark, she saw it clearly. Charles was being cornered in some kind of negotiation. The thought wasn't a temptation, not yet. She wasn't foolish enough to think stepping into his business would do anything but push her out of this house faster. But the knowing sat there, just beneath her ribs. Quiet. Waiting. The next morning, as she carried laundry past the study, the door was cracked open. On his desk lay a folder marked in red. She didn't linger, didn't even turn her head fully toward it. But her mind had already recorded the single word stamped across the top. Litigation. A flash of that library couch hit her again. The weight of a book in her lap, her own. Scribbled notes in the margins. She kept walking. In the kitchen, Marjorie was filling the coffee pot. He's in a mood today, the older woman murmured. Some kind of deal going south. Lena only nodded, but inside, something shifted. She knew deals. She knew contracts. And she knew, without a doubt, that she could help him. The only question was, should she? By Thursday, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Staff whispered in corners. The baby's daytime nanny looked nervous every time Charles passed through a room. Even Marjorie's usual steady calm had cracks in it. Word drifted down to the laundry room. The deal Charles had been working on for months was falling apart. Investors were threatening to pull out. Lawsuits were on the table. That evening, Lena was carrying fresh towels upstairs when she heard his voice again, sharper than she'd ever heard it. It came from the study, low at first, then rising. You can't enforce that clause. It's in violation of state code. I know it, and so do you. A pause. Don't play games with me, Martin. I'll have my lawyers. He broke off, listening. His tone changed, colder. Then we'll see you in court. The call ended with a decisive click. Silence. Lena stood frozen in the hallway, towels pressed against her chest. She knew the law he was talking about. She'd read it. And from what she'd overheard in bits and pieces all week, she also knew he was missing something that could flip the negotiation in his favor and save him from the lawsuit entirely. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She could stay quiet. That would be safer. Or she could speak up and risk everything. She knocked lightly on the study door. Come in, his voice called, clipped. He was behind the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the red-lit folder open in front of him. He looked up, clearly surprised to see her. What is it? Lena stepped inside, the towel still in her arms like a shield. I couldn't help overhearing just now about the clause in the contract. His brows drew together. You were eavesdropping? I was walking by, she said evenly. And I think you might be looking at it the wrong way. Excuse me. She set the towels down on a chair. If the contract is the one with the land use dispute, there's a section buried in the addendum that overrides the clause they're trying to enforce. It's based on the property's historical zoning designation. He leaned back, crossing his arms. And you would know that how? I read, she said simply. And I've worked cleaning offices where those contracts sat. Out on desks. I noticed patterns. Language. I started studying it. The silence stretched. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you know more about this than my legal team? I'm telling you they might have missed something, Lena replied, holding his gaze. Page 73, paragraph 4. You'll see it. He stared at her another long moment before turning the folder toward himself and flipping pages. When he reached the one she'd named, his eyes scanned quickly, then stopped. A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise. Then calculation. This changes everything, he murmured. From the doorway, Marjorie's voice came, hesitant. Sir, the investors are calling back. They want an answer now. Charles looked up at Lena. Stay. He picked up the phone, put it on speaker. Martin, I've reviewed the terms again, and I think you've overlooked a critical section. No, it's in the addendum. Page 73. There was a long pause on the other end, then a muffled curse. That's right, Charles said, his tone now measured but cutting. Which means your claim doesn't hold. So here's what's going to happen. He laid out new terms, his voice steady and commanding, but Lena caught it, the smallest thread of energy beneath it. The knowledge that he was back in control, and that she had put him there. By the time he hung up, the tension in the room had shifted completely. Marjorie was staring at Lena like she'd never seen her before. Even Charles seemed to take a moment before speaking. You just saved me millions, he said finally. And probably my reputation. I saved your deal, Lena said, her voice quiet but firm. The rest is up to you. For the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. A real smile, not the cool, practiced curve she'd seen before. I misjudged you. You did, she said, not unkindly. The power in the room felt different now. Balanced. The next morning, the house felt different. The whispers were gone. Staff walked through the halls without the tension that had gripped them all week. Even the baby seemed lighter, cooing happily when Lena came to lift her from the crib. By mid-morning, Charles called Lena to the study again. The red-lit folder was closed now, replaced by a clean, new contract. I spoke with my legal team last night, he began, his voice steady. They confirmed. Everything you said. The deal is secure. The lawsuit's gone. Lena waited, unsure if this was thanks or just a status report. He set a crisp white envelope on the desk. This is your new contract. I'd like you to stay. Here, not as household staff, but as my personal aide. Better pay, reasonable hours. And the freedom to speak up whenever you see something that needs fixing. Her fingers stayed at her sides. And if I say no? A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Then I'll wish you well, and hope someone else is smart enough to hire you before I change your mind. She thought about the long nights on the nursery floor, the way she'd been treated like a shadow in these halls. She thought about the baby, not Charles's daughter in title, but a child who'd learned her heartbeat. I'll stay, she said finally. For her. He nodded once. For her, he agreed. When words spread through the household, it was like watching a ripple in still water. The younger staff looked at Lena with something close to awe. The older ones, including Marjorie, offered quiet nods that said more than words. Even the security guard at the gate tipped his head when she passed by that afternoon. 2 days later, Charles surprised everyone, himself included, by holding a small gathering in the great room. Staff were invited, not just the usual line of executives and investors. I want to acknowledge someone who kept this house standing in more ways than one, he said, standing at the front. His gaze found Lena in the crowd. She saw what the rest of us missed. She spoke up when she didn't have to. And because of her, this company and my family are in a stronger position today. It was brief, but it was public. And in a house where invisible work was the norm, it mattered. Later, as people drifted away, Charles approached Lena quietly. I've been thinking about what you said, about being here for the child. I haven't been the kind of father she needs. I'm going to change that. Lena studied him for a long moment. He looked different, not softer, exactly, but more open, as if a crack in the armor had let in a sliver of light. Good, she said simply. That night, she sat in the nursery again, but this time in the rocking chair instead of the floor. The quilt was still draped over her lap, the baby nestled against her shoulder. Outside, the wind rattled the window, but inside, the air was calm. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Charles was still Charles, sharp edges and all. But now he saw her. The staff saw her. And maybe, most importantly, she saw herself again. For years, she'd believed her life had narrowed to survival. Now she realized she'd been wrong. Sometimes, all it took to open the door again was a moment of courage. The kind that came when someone's safety or future meant more to you than your own. She kissed the baby's forehead, whispering softly into the quiet room. We're safe. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. 2 years later, Lena Parker stood at the front of a small community conference room. A stack of handouts in her hands, and the hum of conversation filling the air. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. Today it was a simple navy blazer, dark jeans, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from living a life you'd chosen. The sign on the wall read, "Know your rights, employment and contract basics." Around the tables sat a mix of people, single parents, young workers, older employees who'd been burned by fine print. Lena had started the workshops 6 months ago, after realizing how many people were just like she'd been, smart, capable, but convinced their voices didn't matter in rooms where power spoke the loudest. She walked them through plain English explanations of clauses, terms, and how to push back when something wasn't fair. She used stories, sometimes her own, sometimes from the dozens who'd come to her for help. And always, she reminded them, "You have the right to be seen. Don't hand that away." The work had grown beyond what she expected. A local nonprofit partnered with her. Now, she'd been invited to speak at 2 city events. And last month, she'd been offered a grant to keep the workshops free for anyone who needed them. She didn't tell many people about the moment that started it all: a nursery floor, a baby's quiet breathing, and a man who thought she was invisible. But the memory stayed with her, not as a wound anymore, but as proof of how quickly life could turn when you stepped forward instead of staying silent. Charles Whitmore. He was still in business, though less untouchable than before. He'd taken time away from work the year after Lena left his estate, traveling with his daughter, showing up at her school events. The press had painted it as a softer, more family-focused Whitmore. Lena just hoped it was real. She never went back to the mansion. She didn't need to. As the workshop wrapped up, a young man lingered by the door. "I didn't think people like me could understand this stuff," he said quietly. "But you made it make sense." Lena smiled. "That's the point. Once you understand it, you own it. And no one can take that from you." When the room emptied and she was stacking chairs, she paused for a moment, looking out the window at the busy street below.
Down the grand staircase of the Lockwood estate came the soft patter of 2 sets of bare feet. The twins. 5 years old. Dressed in matching designer pajamas. Eyes sharp as glass. Not smiling. At the bottom of the stairs, she stood waiting. Edna. Mid-50s. Pressed uniform. Calloused hands that had rocked other people's babies longer than her own. No fear in her eyes. No fake grin either. Just stillness. Like a woman who'd already seen the storm, and decided it wasn't going to scare her. The children stared, daring her to blink first.